Great start to 2024 as Unai Emery crosses another item off his Aston Villa to-do list: win an FA Cup third-round game. And if you believe in omens, you know the last time we overturned Middlesbrough in the FA Cup, it was in the fourth round of 1957. Obviously, the trip to Teeside is the crux of today's program, but we're also into transfer clickbait season, and there have been a couple of interesting names associated with Villa, both incoming and outgoing, and there's this matter of the FA Cup fourth round draw to discuss as well. So let's not leave it really agonizingly late. Let's talk about Middlesbrough 0, Aston Villa 1. Welcome to the parlor where transfer rumors, speculation, and gossip are always welcome. And two names that have popped up regularly over the first week of this window are Hellas Verona forward Cyril Ngonge and Roma forward Paulo Dybala. What's interesting about these two is from a positional profile perspective, they are almost exactly the same. They can play striker, second striker, number 10, or right wing. They're both left-footed, similar stature, both very technical players who can operate in tight spaces. The difference is Dybala turns 31 in November and Ngonge turns 24 in May. Oh, and Dybala, reigning world champion with Argentina. Monchi's connection to Roma does give the Dybala rumors, I think, a little bit more credibility. This is a guy who in the goal involvements department would be considered prolific, and he's a serial trophy winner with Champions League pedigree. He was one of the players who stepped up to score from the penalty spot to help lift Argentina to a World Cup title, and his relationship with Emi Martinez and Emi Buendia makes this also an obvious kind of link. Buendia stepping up his recovery. It'd be great to have somebody there to help him because they play in similar positions and help push one another. I think that's logical. Not to mention having a player in his 30s who has won things and has a good reputation. That helps young players in the process of learning how to win big games. I think this is the kind of signing that would actually help increase Villa's global profile. And for those comparing it to another Phil Coutinho type move, yes, there has been a lot of injuries, especially of late. But at £10.5 million for a release clause until January 15th, man, that seems like a no-brainer to me. I also do wonder if Monchi might just be playing off one side or club against the other, because that seems like something he might do. Like, is he saying to Hellas Verona, hey, we can get this guy over here who's won a World Cup and a bunch of trophies and is prolific for less than what you're asking for this guy on a relegation-threatened team? Which makes me wonder, what would happen if you put Cyril Ngonge in a team like Aston Villa where there's quality all around? And obviously there's something very alluring about bringing in a player at 23, 24 before he gets really big. Now, there are these rumors that he only wants to go to Fiorentina, but I'm sorry, the first phone call Monchi makes is to Ngonge's agent to find out if he's interested in coming to the Premier League and playing on the second place team in that league under Unai Emery. And if the answer is no, that's the end of the chase. You don't pursue or waste your energy going after that. But that means you also have to trust the agent you're talking to. And as we know, agents only operate in the very best interests of their clients. As for these rumors that Jhon Duran might be leaving either via sale or loan, whether in this window or in the summer, there has been something bubbling under the surface on this one for a long time, and it's painfully obvious. And one of the reasons why Jhon Duran burst onto the scene is because he has always been more physically mature than any of his peers. Mentally mature, however, not so much. Exhibit A, deleting all links to Aston Villa from his socials. Like, come on. And who's advising him on that, by the way? Because that's so childish. And if he thinks he has any kind of leverage in more meaningful playing time minutes over Unai Emery, who just led the club to its greatest calendar year in club history of 149 years? You've got to be kidding me. Duran has no leverage. Emery has 100% leverage. So in this tension, it reflects badly on the player, not the manager. Keeping in mind that Rob McKenzie and Jhon Ngonge were the ones that scouted and ultimately recruited Duran from Major League Soccer, I'd be curious to know if they were knocking on Villa's door to try to get him to Spurs. I don't think they are, which also says something because they just signed Timo Werner on loan. And that tells you that the Monchi and Emery recruitment profile criteria is completely different from what we had here previously. And one of the problems for Duran at Chicago Fire was that he had a revolving door of coaches there. So he basically did whatever he wanted. And that club, all they cared about was selling him on for a big fee, which they eventually got. They don't care what happens afterwards. So maybe developmentally, MLS and Chicago Fire might have been a misstep in his career, and I just wonder again who's advising him on these things. In retrospect, the timing of this transfer was rather awkward, and the wheels would have been in motion long before Unai Emery came to the club, and we needed a backup striker to Ollie Watkins. Duran arrives a year ago, and everybody thinks, well, here's the heir apparent to Watkins or the backup to Watkins. And then we were told by Unai Emery, who knows these things, that the kid is too raw and he's not ready yet for the Premier League. And Unai Emery needs his players to be Premier League or first team ready. There's no denying the physical or technical attributes of Jhon Duran, but attitude, maturity, humility are all cornerstones of an Unai Emery run club. And we've seen more than enough examples now that he's not there yet. I guess the preference would be to keep him around, loan him out until he figures it out, because at some point he'll probably realize the best place he could possibly be is playing for Unai Emery at Aston Villa. But something tells me that divorce is going to occur here, and if that happens, then we need to sell him for more than what we paid. On then finally to Middlesbrough and the FA Cup at Riverside Stadium, which was one of those first kind of generic new grounds in that era, which I say with no disrespect. It's just that from my Shoot magazine influenced youth, I loved Ayresome Park, which featured an Archibald Leach grandstand like at Villa Park. And it's funny, two of my favorite grounds from that era, Roker Park Sunderland and Ayresome Park Middlesbrough, not far from one another, and both were kind of abandoned for these sort of more generic modern stadiums. But I digress. There were 4,400 Aston Villa fans there. That is incredible when you think that there are two clubs still in this competition who have a ground capacity that I don't even think is 4,400. Just quickly on the FA Cup, because I am a nostalgic guy and that competition has always meant a lot to me. Even I was left feeling very underwhelmed by the first few days of this competition, particularly the all Premier League games. Palace, Everton, Brentford, Wolves, even Spurs, Burnley. They were all so lackluster and low priority feeling, almost on the verge of being like nuisance games. And then you wonder, okay, well, does this competition really only benefit the lower league clubs because they have so much to gain from a home draw or a big scalp? And it's an EFL competition, so it doesn't have the Premier League production machine behind it. And that's a big deal for me. We don't have the build-up, the grandeur, the punditry. All those things are important elements to make this feel big and important. But on Saturday and Sunday, I watched the live as it happens coverage where they're updating games from everywhere the whole window, which is glorious. And that's when you see the true value, history, and the wonderment of the FA Cup, where small club, maybe even non-league, hosts bigger club, or there's a major upset from a lower league team. But this also leads to one of my biggest pet peeves in the FA Cup, and that's the fact that VAR is not applied equally across all games in the competition, which is utterly ridiculous to me. So in that case, if your small non-league ground can't equip itself with the VAR gear, then you bin it for everybody. And maybe say, come the quarterfinals, everybody must have VAR usage in those games, or something to that effect. And in the fourth round, we've been drawn at Chelsea. And I knew it as soon as their ball came out first. I said to my missus, this is going to be us here, and sure enough, so we're off to Stamford Bridge, which actually hasn't been a terrible place for us of late, even if you chuck in the Carabao Cup loss on penalties, the Cameron Archer header game. So it's not the worst draw. It's not at Old Trafford, let's put it this way. And there were a number of Premier League sides drawn against each other. So if you do get through round 4, you could start to dream a little bit in round 5. And the reason we were in the fourth round pot was thanks to another Aston Villa late winner, as I welcome you to the Holy Trinity Show, where I review the 3 big issues or moments that defined Borough 0, Villa 1. And as for the key numbers, tackles 1 was among many stats that heavily favored the visitors, and I'm convinced that this is the Boubacar Kamara effect. Kamara won more than 25% of all of our tackles. He went 6 for 7 on the day by himself. Maybe we should start with Boubacar Kamara because he is the key issue number 3 for me. Bouba's back, and yes, it was a very avoidable red card, and he will have learned from it, as will some of his teammates, but sometimes it's when a player is missing that you truly realize their value and importance to your group. Boubacar Kamara has, among his many good attributes, a couple of really important ones. Some of it is intellectual, some of it is technical. He's a good tackler, as I mentioned, but his range of passing is excellent. If you added up all his passing accuracy over his time at Aston Villa, it's in the high 80s, which is great for a defensive midfielder. And if you added up his accurate long balls, that's passes over 20 yards, he'd be in the high 60s, which too shows how good his range of passing is. The reason why so many clubs were interested in Boubacar Kamara was because of his innate ability to identify imbalance and danger in a game and then snuff out problems before they happen. And that comes down to his game IQ, the most important tool any player can have. There was this extraordinary stat going around that Boubacar Kamara had not been dribbled past this year in the Premier League. I find that almost hard to believe, and I'm not sure if I trust that entirely. But Ezri Konsa had a similar stat recently, and he's a central defender, so the game is in front of him most of the time. When you're a central midfielder and the game is all around you and you're not allowing players to dribble past you, it's because you can anticipate where they're going to go and stop it before it happens. And think about it. This is a guy at 24 years of age who's only just now coming into his prime. What's going to happen in 2 more years under Unai Emery when he's at his full prime? Let's hope we get to find out. 2 statistics that are often associated with players successful in this particular number 6 defensive midfield type role are interceptions and recoveries. And in this game, Bouba had 1 interception, but 6 recoveries. This is just one of those 6. And when you look at this, think about the elements that are required to make this look so easy and effective. And the first one is anticipation, anticipating the weight of pass, the danger area, and where to attack the player, like where to run from. Then what's your closing speed over 5 to 10 yards? Well, he's quick. And of course, the touch. How good is your first touch? He makes it look easy because he was born with the sense. And he was born to play in this position. That's what I think's happened here. Irritating issue, not top 3, but Rob Jones had an utter stinker in this match. I was shaking my head at all the non-calls. And I think that was starting to wind the players up a little bit because we were booked 5 times. 3 of those were for dissent. That's to 1 Middlesbrough yellow card in the entire game. And so that means another £600 in the Aston Villa fine kitty at the end of the year. But the most blatant one was the non-penalty call when Alex Moreno was tripped in the box. And I realize Premier League referees rely pretty heavily on VAR, which only further underlines my point that to not apply VAR evenly across the competition actually undermines the integrity of the competition. It's laughable and ridiculous. I can't believe it's happening. But I also think that referees don't want to make decisions with the idea that maybe that decision gets reversed, which undermines them in the game. This was not even close. And I get that the game is fast and that things happen really quickly. But from his vantage point, you would have thought that Jones would have made a decision here the same way Stuart Atwell did in the Burnley game, only that penalty between Ramsey and Duran was less obvious than this one. And if Villa converts a penalty just around the hour mark, think about how that changes the complexion of the tie. Burrow has to abandon the low block and chase an equalizer. And does that even affect the entire complexity of the round? And this is what bugs me. While that wasn't being given, over at a Premier League ground, VAR was giving that decision. And that's what makes the lack of even application of the video assistant referee system across the competition utterly idiotic. Big issue number 2, minute management. When you think about the players who we are going to heavily rely on in the second half of the season and down the stretch, obviously Emi Martinez is in there, but from a load management perspective, goalkeepers just don't have as much strain on them as outfield players. So we think about John McGinn, Douglas Luiz, Boubacar Kamara, Pau Torres, Ezri Konsa. You could probably throw Jacob Ramsey and Leon Bailey into that discussion, but there is cover on the wings with Zaniolo and Moussa Diaby, more so than in the midfield areas when Yuri Tielemans is out. So anytime you can keep the squad as fresh as possible, it is a good thing, not just for the short term, but as we move into March, April, and May. How lovely then to be able to line up the way we did on Saturday, giving more meaningful minutes to Jhon Duran, Clement Longley, Leander Dendoncker, 3 players who might not be long for Aston Villa, but we need them to be ready, we need them to be capable now, today. And then to be able to send on the cavalry, Watkins, Luiz, Zaniolo, Diaby, and give them some minutes. Oh, it's such a lovely luxury to have. And when you manage those minutes and you go and get the result, well, Unai Emery surely will have rewarded himself at the end of the day with a nice little glass of claret, maybe some truffled almonds or nice Spanish olives to go along with that. A culinary pat on the back for our head chef, who just seems to be able to get the ingredients right time and time again. Just before we get to the number 1 big moment, I'm excited to reveal that Paul Handsaker will be there live for Aston Villa's final league appearance at Goodison Park. And he's taking his trusty number 2 man Brad with him for a VIP experience. And hopefully he witnesses yet another victory live, because he's been on a good roll this year. Now, during that Everton review on this program, we are also going to reveal the new 24/7 brand identity. This logo is going to change in this next show coming up. And it's really exciting for me and for Paul, because this is a company that devotes its entire existence on refreshing, renewing, repairing, replacing, and rebuilding other people's properties, home or business. So to be able to modernize and update and refresh the 24/7 brand identity and all of its visual assets, and by the way, it's dramatic, is really, really exciting. And it's just the first of many exciting evolutions that are going to happen for 24/7 in 2024. And the number 1 big issue or moment that defined Middlesbrough 0, Aston Villa 1, cardiac cash. One of the more frequently used buzzwords in football of late is suffering. A team needs to suffer out of possession at times, or in trying to break down a stubborn opponent in order to go and grind out results, which is the point of the exercise, especially in a cup tie. But supporters also have to suffer at times, and Aston Villa supporters are starting to get very, very used to late-game heroics. When you think back to Zielinski and John McGinn, you had Zaniolo versus Sheffield United, Ollie Watkins against Bournemouth, and then, of course, Douglas Luiz's penalty recently against Burnley. The fact that we are sticking with games mentally and still believing that we can win them even late is a wonderful and encouraging testament to our growing maturity and confidence. And you'll notice we're not blowing teams away anymore like we were at the beginning of the season, and that's because we're in this low block phase of the season where we're playing teams at the lower reaches of the table, and we're going to have to learn how to do that. And I noticed, especially in the first half, how often Villa had the chance to maybe play through a press and into midfield and decided not to. They decided not to play the high-risk balls and instead defer to keeping possession, recycling the ball, and forcing the opponent to chase, which does tend to tire them out. It also does test the patience of supporters at times, because we too are sometimes waiting for things to happen. Now, Matty Cash has been what you might call a whipping boy for a segment of Villa Nation. But in this game, I thought he actually had a couple of very meaningful contributions even prior to the goal. Like in the 16th minute, he looked second best and well beaten, but did somehow manage to come back and make a very important tackle and recover the football. And then not 40 minutes later, he comes along and helps Ezri Konsa on a good recovery run to just toe poke the ball away to Emi Martinez. And that was just 2 defensive actions from the game. I wonder, when he put his fingers in his ear, was that some kind of sign to say, I ignore the haters, or perhaps these calls to upgrade the right back position during the transfer window by signing another player? I don't know. Only he would know. Keeping in mind that the right back in Unai Emery's system is far more conservative than even the left back. So I'm not really sure what more Matt Cash can do. Yes, you can always tidy up your passing accuracy or your crossing accuracy for sure. And I know those are things that he personally wants to work on. And okay, maybe his relationship with Leon Bailey is still developing the way that Moreno and Ramsey developed at the end of last year. But that kind of makes the goal even more special because he isn't getting forward as much. And we're now halfway through the year. He has 3 goals in all competitions, on pace for 6 in the season. Are you kidding me? Would you not take 6 goals from a fullback in any season? And here we almost have a sub-moment to the game-defining moment, because this came from another set piece, and I thought we looked very dangerous from corners all afternoon long, starting with Ezri Konsa, who somehow just managed to miss by a whisker, heading the ball directly into the bottom corner, and that preceded a brilliant chance for Alex backdoor man Moreno, who somehow skied his volley over the top after a second consecutive inch-perfect delivery from Leon Bailey, who's going to get a contract extension here very soon. So when corner number 12 of 12 came around, traveling supporter Gary Polton decided, I'm going to start rolling video on this one because I have a funny feeling that 12 times is going to be the lucky one for Villa. And sure enough, he's right. A game-defining moment, but also an incredibly tone-setting moment for 2024, while also, of course, helping us get into the 4th round of the FA Cup for the first time in eons. This was a very cleverly crafted set piece which bamboozled everybody in red, because they all thought Douglas Luiz was going to have a go. Nobody thought that Matt Cash was going to have a dig from 25 yards, but straight from the cliche cupboard, you cannot win the lottery without a ticket, and in this case, the ticket had one of the biggest swerves on it that I've ever seen. I mean, this started outside the post and then swerved back in. I couldn't believe it when it went in the goal, partially because Tom Glover was excellent for Borough, but that would never have happened. That level of swerve would have not occurred without excellent connection from Matt Cash. What a moment this was, and it's another of many from this season that we may have to revisit later on for the wider implications of it. Next up, the Toffees, and what will be a very significant and frankly sad occasion, the final league meeting between Aston Villa and Everton at Goodison Park. And I'm all for progress. I realize owners want to make scads of money, but as I alluded to with the Riverside and Stadium of Light, it just seems like we're building the exact same stadium over and over again all around the world. And I wonder, why can't architects somehow incorporate or even bring over some of the elements that made those original venues iconic. Like, I know you're not going to build a $1 billion stadium and then make this teeny tiny, ridiculously small little players' entrance tunnel, but you know what I mean? Can you bring other elements in or pay tribute to those original venues, especially when you're moving location the way Everton is? And once again, it feels like this game is coming around at a good time for Villa, not so much for Everton, who had Dwight McNeil stretchered off in that Palace FA Cup game. Dominic Calvert-Lewin was red carded, so he's suspended, and now Idrissa Gana is off on AFCON duty, and that's on top of injuries to Ashley Young, Dele Alli, and Doucouré. And Everton has to play that replay with Palace 3 days after our game on Sunday. Now, notwithstanding the Carabao Cup loss at home to Everton, we have had this mastery over the Toffees. We haven't lost to them since 2016 and at Goodison since 2015. And if you believe in odds, well, then you know that over time they do tend to diminish. In other words, the pattern can't continue forever. Still, though, apart from Buendia and Mings and now Tielemans and Dean, we're in pretty good shape availability-wise, and January is not a daunting month fixture-wise. And I'm sure you've noticed that Jacob Ramsey and Alex Moreno are starting to look a little bit more like that fine motor that was in the repair shop for quite some time and now purring again on the freeway. And I don't know if you've seen Emi Buendia like sitting on the seats with the team on game days, like to remain part of it, which is really encouraging. And he's also stepping up his recovery using virtual reality of all things. I predict he's going to be playing games in March. By the way, for Christmas, I got the matching long pants to this top, and I really like them because they have zippered pockets and really tight cuffs. Not the zippered cuffs, but the tight cuffs around the ankles. If you're a walker like me, zippered pockets make all the difference because you can put your phone or your keys in there. And by the way, I've sized up here. I'm a big bottom tall, 2XL for all pants and shorts. And I put a link in the description below because right now there are still great savings at the Villa store if you're so inclined to pick up the things you didn't get from Santa. Until the Everton game, be well. And as always, up the mighty Villa!